Welcome to Oops.
Okay, I hear you now.
Outrageous,
myself.
overwhelming possibilities to spread contagious joy. And I'll tell you what, we have some joy here today because I have my friend Nick, who has just an incredible testimony to share with you. But first of all, I would just like to read, and I thought of you when I was looking up this verse to read. It's in Jeremiah 5, and it says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew and approved you as my chosen instrument. And before you were born, I separated and set you apart, consecrating you, and I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." And so I thought of you,
Amen.
not necessarily as a prophet to the nations, but who knows what God has in store for
Amen.
you.
Amen.
But it's just a miracle that you're here, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I'll tell you what, and this is Nick North, if I didn't say your name, that God has just done a wonderful thing. So we're going to start at the beginning of your journey.
All right.
So where do you want to begin?
Well, my mother, she was a hairdresser for 30 years, and she currently does Avon. My father was a welder, a union welder, and I have.
Where did you live?
We lived in the Bay Area in a small town called El Sobrante, right next to Richmond, kind of, in the California, in the Oakland area. And I have two brothers, one sister, and they have a different father. My father raised them, and
So you didn't get to know them very well, or did you?
No,
get together?
we all grew up. They're one of my brothers is 49, the other brother is 44, my sister is 41, so there's a big gap,
Oh, I see.
They were out of the house when I was young,
I see. I
Yeah.
see. Yeah. So as a kid, what kind of kid were you?
I was a happy kid.
You
I was
were?
a boys club kid,
Oh, you were.
Boy of the Year, 1987.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, I played a lot of sports and was a fisherman, and I was a happy kid.
And what sports did you play?
Any sport I could
Really?
get my hands on, football, basketball, everything, ping pong, any sport you could think of.
Ping pong is great.
Yeah.
It's hard. Well, so Nick, you just were going along, and did you have any spiritual input into your life at that time?
No, I didn't. My sister was raised in a Catholic school, but my mom and my dad just put her in the Catholic school, but they didn't really have no parts of it, really. So I never had pursued God or had any spiritual influence coming up
In your life.
in my life. Yeah.
So then you went to high school, and everything
Yeah.
was in the Bay Area. Did you play sports in high school?
Yeah, I was a big-time football player.
Yeah.
Played wide receiver.
So we love that because my brother plays.
Yeah,
as you know,
yeah, of
as a
course.
kid.
Yeah, I've always.
So I had to learn that sport.
Yeah, I bet you did. Yeah, so I played a lot of sports in high school. Did a little bit of everything. My parents, they got divorced when I was like around 9 or 11, and I was living with my mother. And I kind of, she was busy being a single mom.
Right.
We had a hair shop in our house, so she was always cutting hair. So I was always, running amok and not doing my chores and not doing what she was telling me to do. So she told my dad, I can't handle him. He's getting too big. I can't whoop him anymore. So I ended up living with my dad from like 11 years old through my high school years. And it was just me and my dad. We lived in a house, 3-bedroom house, just me and my dad. And basically, I thought I was too cool for my own good. My dad would tell me hey, you want to go out to get breakfast? And I was, hungover or something from.
And he didn't even
he didn't even know.
you were getting
I was getting high.
Yeah.
I was getting high, and I'd want to sleep all day Saturday morning, and he'd ask me if I want to go to breakfast, and I would say, no, I didn't want to go. And my dad, he was a cancer survivor, so he had throat cancer, and so he had a hole here on his. He had no throat box, you know, and the radiation took about half of his throat off, and it swelled his cheekbones up really big. So he was a, you know, intimidating sight, you know, so because when he talked like, you know, because
it could have to go through the
tracheotomy
voice box.
and so, you know, my dad was going through his own issues at the time, you know, from being divorced, and he had met a girl he was going out with, and things were going good with them, you know, they were a happy couple, and I guess my dad asked her if she would marry him, and she wasn't ready for that, you know, so they ended up splitting apart. My dad became real depressed, you know, and I noticed it, you know, but I was a teenager, and you know,
you had your own, you were doing
yeah,
fun
you know,
things.
I was being selfish, I guess, you know, I didn't really see it. And my dad, he would do this, he would, you know, when I was in junior high and stuff, he would go to work early in the morning, and he would make sure I was on my feet before he'd leave the house to go to work, because I would go to school later, and he would already be gone, and I'd go get on the bus and stuff. So he'd make sure I was up on my feet. He'd come and hit me in my ribs or something while I was sleeping. You know, that was his way of waking me up, you know. And so he'd make sure I was on my feet, you know. So we had that little habit, you know. And throughout high school, we carried that on, you know. And I come home one night, and I was high. I was high on marijuana, and I was trying to think how I could get into my room, come through the front door, and get past his bedroom where he would be, and into my room without him asking me a lot of questions, so he wouldn't want to look in my eyes and see the redness in my eyes. So I come through the door, hey, how's it going, you know, and I jet right into my room, and I noticed that he was writing on a piece of paper, sitting at his desk, and you know, when I got into my room, I was, you know, wondering. It didn't really occur to me then what he was doing, you know. But my dad, he would go out, but he would leave like 6 in the evening, and he might stay out late, you know, to 11 or 12 or whatever, and come home. But he would never leave the house late, you know. He would never leave in the middle of the night. And that night, I remember hearing his truck start up in the middle of the night, like around midnight, and I remember hearing that when I was sleeping. And that morning, you know, I woke up to the doorbell, and as I was going to answer the door, I noticed that it was like 8:15, and I should have been out the door to school already.
He hadn't stopped by to poke you in the ribs.
He hadn't hit me in the ribs and wake me up for school, you know, and so I answered the door, and it was my grandfather, and it was the cops, and they told me it's going to be all right. And before they told me anything else, I just, for some reason, I knew what had happened somehow, you know, and my instant regard was just to scoot back away from them, you know, and they tried to grab me, and I moved away from them, you know. They told me that my dad had committed suicide. He ended up driving his truck over to his ex-girlfriend's house, and he shot himself in his truck outside of her house. You know, and
so hard for a kid. So how old were you?
I was 16.
16.
I was 16. I was a junior in high school.
Wow.
And so we buried my father, and you know, I felt really bad for his ex-girlfriend, you know, to have to, you know, deal with somebody actually, you know, killing themselves outside your door, you know.
Yes.
So she came to the funeral, and nobody was mad at her or anything like that, you know. And my mother was like, well, you could come and live with me. She was remarried, happily remarried, you know.
Oh, that's good.
And, you know, but I was a kid, and I wasn't understanding her new husband yet.
Oh.
You know, now he's the greatest guy on earth, you know. Now I love him to death now, you know, but when I was a kid, I wasn't, you know, they had rules, you know. And with my dad, it was more like I kind of did my own thing, you know. There wasn't he didn't talk a lot because, you know, he had that operation. So so she said you could come live with us, and I didn't want to, you know, kind of just was from pushing everybody away still, you know, and so I was receiving Social Security because I was under 18, and
as kind of a death benefit.
yeah, death benefit. So I stayed and lived in the house
By yourself at 16?
by myself.
I'm surprised that they would let you.
I know, and well, we're in the process of moving my sister and my brother in because they were currently going through things, and so
they were older than you.
yeah,
That's right. So
it took a couple months till they got there, and I was, you know, so I still took myself to school, and you know, when I went into school, I remember everybody looking at me because they made an announcement, you know, and everybody was looking at me, and you know, now everybody wanted to hang out with me because I had my own. I was the only high school kid with his own place. Everybody wanted to come hang out at my house, you know. But after a couple months, my brothers and sisters moved in, and we tried to keep the house until you know we couldn't keep the house anymore. I had to foreclose it and went to bankruptcy, wow. And I still wouldn't take that invitation to go live with my mother. You know,
So how old were you at this point?
17. I graduated high school 17. Wow. You know, had a lot of letters from colleges and stuff to play football, but I had horrible grades because in my junior year, my senior year, I had average grades to begin with, but after my junior and senior year, my grades just plummeted, and they kind of just graduated me out of, you know, keepsake, you know.
Yeah.
So I missed a lot of opportunities, you know. If I'd have just had better grades, I could have went to college and stuff like that. But I went the opposite way. I ended up, you know, not taking my mother's offer, and I ended up, you know, into the streets, you know, in the streets of Richmond. You know, it's a hard place.
Oh, so you were just out of your house?
Yeah, I got out of my house and I went to live with friends.
Wow. And just kind of floated?
Floated. Only thing I had left was my dad's truck, you know. And then eventually ended up losing that, you know, and so I just
so much on your own.
Yeah, I was on my own, you know, but by choice, you know, for just bad decision making, you know,
and
my
during
part.
that time, you just kind of float around to friends, and you were still going to school.
No, I had graduated high school,
I see.
And graduated from high school, and just would try to get a job here, job there, and I was living with friends, you know, on their couch and stuff like that. Friends' parents, because everybody still lived with their parents then, you know. And I just slowly started doing the wrong things, you know. Got into drugs more heavily, you know, and it went from, you know, marijuana to cocaine.
So where did you have the money to get that?
We just picked up other bad things, you know, hustling, they call it, you know, hustling, stealing, you know, yeah, you name it, the crime, and I've done it, you know. And I first started getting in trouble, but I never really got in trouble for it back then. When I was 17, 18, I hadn't got caught, you know. I just had a bad spree of not doing anything, you know, and being homeless. I was a friend of mine, his father let me use his minivan, me and another kid, and we stayed in the minivan, and we tried to work 2 jobs and live in this minivan and stuff. It just was hard, so I made a decision to go in the Coast Guard, to join the Coast Guard. You know,
that was probably one of the best decisions.
Best decision I ever did in my life, you know.
So that gave you a purpose.
Gave me a purpose,
no
you know.
Floating anymore.
Yeah, I went to boot camp and came back. I was a Coast Guard member, and I was doing really good for, you know, 3-4 years of my life. I had a steady girlfriend. She was living with me the whole time I was in the Coast Guard, and I got stationed in Oakland, in my hometown, and basically that was the wrong thing to do, because I ended up going back, hanging out with my old friends and getting into my old ways.
When you were in high school.
Yeah,
the friends that you had.
Yeah, those friends, and I ended up going back into my old ways, and I ended up getting on drugs again, and I ended up getting kicked out of the Coast Guard.
Oh no.
Yeah, I ended up getting discharged under honorable conditions, but
honorable.
Yeah, but I was discharged though,
Yeah.
so I don't get couldn't receive any benefits or anything.
Oh, you didn't? So
No.
there you were again.
Back in the same predicament I was before. And this time it was really worse, you know. This time I was, you know, I had burnt a lot of my bridges. I was on drugs. People tried to help me, and I refused their help, you know. And I was on the street this time, big time. I'd live in abandoned houses. You know, I was doing drugs every single day, probably $70, $80 of drugs a day.
And so you were just hustling for him.
I was just hustling, stealing cars.
And here you were, such a sharp kid, and
Here I was serving my country. Now I'm running out of Home Depot with a backpack blower on, running out the emergency exit doors as the sirens go off.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just horrible. I was a slave. You know, the devil had me wrapped around his fingers so tight that I could not picture a way of, there was no picturing getting out, and I just kept getting, you know how you carry a bag of concrete, weighs like 60 pounds, and you put it on your shoulder? Well, it felt like I had like 5 or 6 of those on my shoulder, and it just pushed me to the ground into a hole. Wow. And I'd just be looking up at trying to get out of that hole, and I never could, you know. And it put me around some people that, you know, that were cold, you know, cold-hearted, you know, and I know I wasn't like that, you know. I still had a heart, because, you know, when things would go down, I would think about it and be like, you know, I can't do that, you know.
Did you feel inside so lonely?
Yes, man, I'd be walking the street, you know, because I wouldn't have somewhere to go, and I'd have to just walk on the streets, you know, and sometimes I'd just hit a cut and cry, because I just felt so alone, you know.
Was there just an emptiness inside?
So empty. I mean,
and
it felt like everybody was just trying to eat me alive, you know.
And you had no knowledge of where to look to find any hope.
I was blind to all the signs.
So you were hopeless.
I was hopeless.
Oh, wow.
I was hopeless.
So then what happened?
So I, in and out of jail, you know, in and out of jail to the point where, hey, you go to jail again, you're gonna do some time. You're gonna be, you know, you get in trouble again, you're gonna be 8, 9 years, you know.
Wow.
So
how old were you by then?
Well, I spent about from 23 years old to 34 years old being homeless and on drugs and just, you know, hopeless for about 10 to 11 years of just, you know, I wouldn't call my mother on holidays, none of my family, you know. I just, I stayed away, you know.
Did you see them at all during that time?
I seen them every blue moon, maybe, you know. I'd see my mom maybe once every 2-3 years or so, you know. She had moved from California to Idaho, you know, and, but even before that, even when she was around, you know, the family would always say, oh, have you heard from Nick? What's Nick doing? You know, so I spent 11 years, 12 years being, you know, homeless and no job, no nothing. And it put me in jail. This last time I was in jail, I was 34 years old, and I got locked up, and I received a letter from my mother, and she said that she was praying for me.
Wow, did that blow you
and
away?
I had to look back so I went back to the heading of the letter, and I started reading again. I was like, I didn't just read that sentence again. I went back to the beginning of the, so I started reading it over the beginning, and said she was praying for me that I would be a responsible, good, happy person. And I was just like, my mom doesn't pray, you know? And when I thought back, you know, I was like, wow, that's, you know, and I got another letter. So we stayed in correspondence, and she told me that, you know, that I could come maybe get paroled to Idaho. And all of a sudden I felt hope, you know. But at the same time, you know, we're playing cards in jail, you know, and we're in the mess room in jail and playing cards, and they have a church service. So we move over to the corner of the room, and we have to be quiet while we're gambling, we're playing cards for soups and stuff, and we have to be quiet while they're over there praying, you know. But it didn't bother, you know. it didn't bother me. You know, I kept gambling while they're praying. You know, I didn't take heed to the signs. You know.
Yeah. So she still
Yeah.
didn't even phase you.
Didn't phase me. You know, I'm so hard-headed. So we stayed in correspondence, and I ended up talking to the probation and parole to see if I could come to Idaho, and they looked at my record and they said, "Oh no, you can't go to Idaho.
Really?
No, we're trying to keep people like you out of Idaho."
Really? So you were...
So they told me no, and I was like, you know, so my mom called them, and the parole, they went down and went to my mom's house and talked with them, and basically she represented for me, you know, and all of a sudden the probation officer had to change her mind, you know, and was like, okay, maybe this will work. Maybe we could let you go. And so basically I felt this, you know, a little small thing, glimmer of hope, you know, something I never really felt before.
And so then you got to come out.
Yeah.
You got to get out.
So I got out of jail, and I was in jail in California, and I got out of jail, and I went straight to my brother's house. Actually, I got out of jail. I didn't have no ride. So I called one of my old friends, you know, friends that I used to do bad things with. And this was the big test for me, you know. And I had them pick me up, and I had them take me to my brother's house. So they took me to my brother's house, and from there we called my mom, and she hopped in her car and drove down from Idaho to come get me.
Oh, okay.
Wow. So where was she living in Idaho?
She was living in Middleton.
In Middleton.
Yeah.
And she drove.
She drove down to get me because she didn't want me coming up missing again, you know. So she knew she had to hurry because, you know, my past, you know.
Yeah. Well, that you know, right there that's wonderful. The love, your mother did love you.
Yes.
Even though she felt like she couldn't handle you when you were young.
Yes.
She showed that love to you,
Yes.
Nick. So did that really impress you?
Yes.
Your heart.
It was almost. It was like, you know, I was touched.
So here you are at 34, and you could have been hardened, but God allowed your mother at that point to come into your life, back into your life, and pick you up. So I'll tell you what, we have more story to tell, don't we?
Yes, ma'am.
But we have to tune in next week for the rest of the story. But all of you that are watching already realize that Nick's here because of miracle of God. And so before we close, Nick, what would you like to say to people that are in the same spot where you are at this moment?
Yes.
And you had a little bit of hope. And we'll hear the rest of the story next week, but just share with people.
I'd like to just tell you, if you feel lost, or if you feel hopeless or hurt, just know that there's a feeling you could have that just trumps that by tenfold, and that feeling will just give you drive and happiness, and it'll give you a heart so big, and it's through Jesus Christ. He will save you, and he will answer all your prayers, and all you have to do is just submit to the Lord.
So next week we are going to hear the rest of this story, but Nick, God actually did some incredible miracles, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
In getting you to the spot where you're going to be able to find him. That to me is so exciting. The lakes, like I read in the Word, it's just that God really was pursuing you, as you know, as we talked about. Thank you. I mean, it's just an incredible way, the distance the Lord will go.
Yes.
The way everything is put into action in heaven to get you a person that God is reaching out to, that's God's pursuing. All heaven is reaching out.
Yes.
And your mother was praying for you. She was probably praying to God for you, praying for you, but her prayers are part of what God did to make everything come together for you that you're going to hear about in the next next week. So I just praise the Lord that we are able to get to this spot. But folks, you just don't want to miss the incredible rest of Nick's story next week. So don't miss it. Call your friends, tell them to come. It will also be on YouTube probably in a couple weeks, so you just don't want to miss it. Meanwhile, I just want to invite you to come visit us at Central Assembly Christian Life Center. Nick will be there just wanting to love on you and
Yes.
and meet you and help you put your hand on the Lord if you don't know Him. He is available. All of the people at Central Assembly it's just one of the most loving places that you could ever come to find out more about Christ. If you're lonely, just don't miss it, whatever you do. And also, we'd like to invite you to come to our women's group. It's starting again on next Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. And we've got babysitting. I'll tell you what, you don't want to miss it. And also, we have Bible classes on Wednesdays, and Nick is part of a class. And just share a little bit about your class.
Oh, yes. I go to the class taught by Pastor Ryan, and it's we're learning about John. And that's a wonderful class. We've prepped for the class for about 5 weeks, and we spent 5 weeks, and we are on 1st chapter, 5th verse.
1st chapter, 5th verse. That's as
For
far
5
as you've
weeks,
gotten.
and we've just been debating and talking and learning, and it's so exciting, you know. Oh man,
And
it is
Nick,
exciting.
I heard that you really didn't even know who John
Oh.
was, or who
Oh,
Paul was.
I'm just a baby. Yeah, this is all new to me. So, you know, if I could learn it, anybody could learn it. You know.
God has just brought you so far.
Yes.
We have just watched you blossom, and you said you were a happy child,
Yes.
and your happiness is back, isn't
Yes,
it?
it is.
And your joy.
Yes.
Are you still single?
Yes, I am.
You know, girls, this is a pretty good guy. But more than that, your desire right now is just to find
God.
more
yes.
about God and
Yes.
just to grow in Him
Yeah.
and be able to share what God's done. Well, I'll tell you, I want to thank you folks for watching, and I'll tell you what, you will be blessed as you hear what God continues to do in Nick's life and what God can do in your own life, because He is pursuing you just as much as He pursued Nick, because He loves you. That's why Jesus came. He came and died on the cross that every one of us might find Him. God bless you. Tune again next week. We'll see you then. Goodbye.
It's like nothing would come out right.